Okay, so now continuing on with Eruvin, Dav, and Gimel. Yesterday, we were trying to determine what would determine where somebody's living for Shabbat purposes. We were between Makom Lina, the place where you sleep, versus Makom Pita, the place where you eat. So now we're trying to figure out which one it is. So initially, we just finished the. So the last thing we said is that Rav said what determines your location of residence is the place you break bread, whereas Shmuel said it's the place where you sleep. So now we're going to question that assumption. Meitve, on top of Ayin Gimel. So Haroim, the Kayatzin, the Borganin, Shomrei Perot, Bizman Shadarkan Alin Ba'ir, Hare Hein Kashia Ir, Bizman Shadarkan Alin Basada, Yesh Len Alpine Lachol Ruach. So the Brent says as follows, which seems to run counter the idea that it's based on bread, but really it's based on where you sleep, is that, again, we have our guardsmen, we have our shepherds, we have the people who watch the figs, the people who live in those little huts, and the people who watch fruit. So all of them, whenever they sleep in the city, then their tchum is considered as people of the city. But when they tend to sleep outside in the fields near where they're working. So then they get to the Tanama from where they're sleeping, because that means that, but not from the city, which implies that the main focus isn't where you eat, it's where you sleep. So Hatam Anansade Imam Tilahu Rifta Hatam Fe Nechalu. Now, the Gemara said no, that that's a different case because for them, right, it's much easier to, if you're already sleeping outside of the city, you'll probably also be eating outside of the city. So therefore, that's why the main point is where they're sleeping, because that's where they'll be eating as well. But it doesn't necessarily prove anything. So for Yosef, Lo Shmiel Li Hashmatata. So Rav Yosef said, I never heard this. Again, Rav Yosef had an issue where he got sick and then he forgot his what he learned or taught. So really Abaye, At Amart Nihalan, Vaha Amart Nihalan. So you said it. So then Abaye says that you told us, this is what you said. So Ha'achin Clean al Shulchan Avihen, Vishen Vatehen, Strichen Air Lokal Chad Vachad. Again, so this is similar to what our Mishnah, but the Beit says as follows: that if the brothers who are eating by their father's table and they're sleeping in their own houses, then each of them need an eruv, their own eruv, which Amrina Shlamina Makom Lina Gorim, and therefore the fact that even though they're all eating together, they still need to make their own eruv applies that the main thing that determines where your residence for Shabbos is where you sleep, not where you eat. But Amart Lan Allah, Amar Yehuda, Amarab, Vokable, Pras, Shano. And you also taught us that this is the case where they all get food from their father. Right, like he has all the food, so therefore they would go to him to pick up their meals. So therefore, it's as if they're eating there, even if technically they're eating dinner at home, but because all the food came from their parents' house, therefore it's as if they're eating in their parents' house. Okay, so this would imply that the main thing is that determines it isn't where you eat, it's where you sleep. So Tanarbana, I have another parallel case. So so we have 5 women who are receiving a portion from their husband, right? So we're back in the times of polygamy where you could have 5 wives. So right? So again, it's either 5 wives from the husband or 5 slaves from their master. Rabbi Yehuda Matera Machir Banashim, Oser Bavadim. Rabbi Yehuda Matera said that by women, they don't need to make separate Eruvin, but for slaves, they would. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Matir Bavadim, Moser Benashim. Rabbi ben Bava does the reverse. He allows slaves to not have to make their own Eruv. He requires women to make their own Eruv because they're not sleeping in the same house as the husband. So Amar Rav, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So why did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava say yes for slaves but no for women? Daniel Bitra Malka. As it says that Daniel was in the gate of the king. So there and that's refer and again, so that's not saying that Daniel literally lived in the gate of the king of the king of Babel's house, because that would be a little slightly impossible. Rather, what does it mean? It means that he was always by the king, he was always considered as if he was living with the king at his gate, even though wherever he went, because he was the king's servant. So I'd apply that for slaves, it goes by the master, no matter what. So Shita, then it's allowed. Run, isn't it? So and now we're going to try and figure out which one is which and which one makes the most sense. So Shita, isn't it obvious what the circumstances are that Ben it's allowed could run, right? A son by its father, we state that case that it goes based on where you sleep. Isha it's Labalav, Eve it's Larava, Pluk to the Rabbi Yehuda ben Tera from Yehuda ben Baba. So now we get, so now it's the Gemara summarizes for us very nicely that a woman by her husband, again, so son by his father, it's clear it goes by where he's sleeping, whereas by a woman, by her, by women and slaves, for them, it's an argument between Rabbi Yehuda ben Tera and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, whether or not it goes by the by whether or not which one can go by where the master or the husband is. Now that the question comes up, Talmud Itzel Rabbo Mai. So what about a student who lives in the same area as the as his teacher? What would that be? His Rebbe, what would be the case? This is assuming that the Rebbe is the one who's providing for the student. He's the guy, the one who's providing, the student with a place to live and things to eat is his Rebbe. So let's say that's the case, if somebody's going off to a dorm, right? And then the Rosh Yeshiva is technically in charge of everything. And then so right, so that's the case. So Tashma, what's that case? So Rav Beit Rabbi Chia Amar, that Rav, when he was in school by Rabbi Chia, so they said, Ein anas rechin la'arev, sharei anas amchin al shulchano shel Rabbi Chia. So Rav used to say when he was a student, we don't need to make an error because we're part of Rabbi Chia's, we're relying on Rabbi Chia's table, and he's giving us our food and everything else. Therefore, we don't need to make an error. Rabbi Chia Beit Rabbi Omer, but Rabbi Chia said similarly, Ein anas rechin la'arev, sharei anas amchin al shulchano shel Rabbi. And similarly, Rabbi Chia used to say, when he was in school, meaning when he was, it's more like an apprenticeship, I guess. By Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he said that we don't need to make an Eruv because all of us are relying on Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to support us. Therefore, we don't need to make a separate Eruv. So that implies that by Rabbi would be able to rely on wouldn't need an Eruv at all. So Mo Mine Abai Mirava. Then Abai asked for Abba. Misha Gabu and Eruvin. Kishmolechan at Eruvin Lakom Acher. Eruv Echala Kulon. All Tzruchin Eruv Kolchad Vechad. Again, so this argument might sound familiar because we mentioned it a couple of days ago. So when 5 people had collected for the Eruv, and they want to bring it to one other location, do you need to make one person make the Eruv for all of them, or each of them have to make their own individual Eruvs? So Amarlai Eruv Chalakulan, and Rabba said, no, one only one Eruv is necessary. You don't need to have each of them go and give it. I'm not part of this Eruv. One person can do it for everybody else, and then that works just fine. So then that's the question is, so how's that possible? What you should do to the five brothers are similar to the case of the people who collected food for the Eruv. Yet it says for the brothers they each need separate Eruvs. So why is that? Why would all five of them need their own separate Eruv? So what's the case? Going to Ika Diurin Badayu. Rather, there must be other people living there besides the sons. That's why it would be an issue. Migo Dahanyasri, Haninam since the other people living in the courtyard require their own separate Eruvin. So similarly, we require the sons to do the same. So this could also work for our Mishnah because it says Ematai when. Now it qualifies when the sons are considered to be in one household versus not. So when they take the Eruv to another location, not in the father's house, but to another place. Sorry, this is from the Trachling case. So if there's no two without they bring the Eruv to another location, or if it's the Eruv is in the structure that they're living in, right? Right. So in case either of you bring the Eruv to the other somewhere else, or if that when it's going somewhere else, that's when everybody needs to contribute separately. But if you're bringing it to them, or that there's nobody else besides those mentioned already, like those five people that are already in the courtyard, then that means that these brothers would not need to make an Eruv. Because one is being by the Eruv is let's say the father is hosting it, so then you don't need to make a separate you don't need to arrange a separate Eruv because we're already covered. Rachia bar Abin Mirav Yeshet. So Rachia bar Abin asks Yeshet as follows. B'nei Beirav, Achli Nahama b'Bagat, V'atu Baiti b'Beirav, Kima Shchina Lahu Tchama, Beirav Mashkin Lahu, Omi Baga Mashkin Lahu. So Rachia bar Abba has the following question for Yeshet. So now we're back to the student case. So the student, the students of the house of Rabbi, so if they were to eat bread in their houses in the field, right, so then they eat in the field, and then they come to the house of their and then they go and they sleep in the house of their Rabbi, and that from where do you measure their tchum? So where do you measure where their tchum goes from? From where they were eating or where they're sleeping? Basically, they would, right? So the question is like, so they would, so the setup looks like they had two separate places they were staying. They would sleep by the Rebbe. They would go out then they would eat at someone else's house. Who lived out in the field as opposed to the city. So Amarle Mashkina Miberav. So then Rav Sheshet responded to Rav Chia that you measure based on the Rebbe's house, meaning you measure it from where they slept. Hare notenet erevo tochapayim ama v'atu BAYT b'veitei mashkina le'tchum erevei. Wait, but why is that the case? Didn't we say that if you had made your Eruv somewhere outside of the city, within 2,000 amot of where you are, of where you're sleeping, then you go home and you sleep in your house, that the tchum follows your Eruv, it doesn't follow where you slept. So wait, which one is it? So So the answer is as follows: Bahu anan sadi, bhada anan sadi. Right. So we are right. So we can answer both these questions clearly by stating what the person's intent was and doing each of these circumstances. That'll make the contradiction go away. So what is the solution? Ahu anan sahade di mit dar le hatam nechale. So the case of the person posited his eruv, therefore he's clearly saying that he wants his location to be where his eruv tchumen is placed, and if he could sleep there, he would. But it might be that it's just not necessarily safe enough location, and therefore, let's say it's not warm enough, or not sufficiently protected from the elements. His liking, therefore, he would want to sleep in his therefore that's why you measure based on where the eruv is placed, eruv tchumen is placed. But in our case right here with the students versus in the Rebbe's house is the if you could have had lunch at his Rebbe's house instead of having to go to somebody else's house out of the city, that'd be much better. Who'd want to go through that extra effort of walking out of town? Then everybody knows that no student is is actively looking to walk an extra 20 minutes. In fact, I'd say most people aren't looking to walk an extra 20 minutes ever. So that's the difference, right? Because when you set up your eruv tchumen, it means that you really wanted to reside there for Shabbos. But by the case of the students, true, they are pulled in two directions, but really, if they could have had all their meals in the original location, they would have. By Rami Bar Chama Rav Chesed, and Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chesed as follows: Avu b'no harav v'tamido harabim damu or yichidim damu. So Rav Chesed asked, do we view a father and son or a Rebbe and a Talmud, teacher and a student, as many people or as individuals? Right? They considered a unit or multiple units. Strichen eruv or ein strichen eruv. Do they require an eruv individually or not? Mavui shalahen nitar b'lechi v'kora or ein nitar b'lechi v'kora. So would there an alleyway, could you permit it with just a lechi or a kora, or would it be permitted without a lechi or a kora? Because if they're considered to be, like I say, like one family unit, doesn't require separate eruv, right? So again, if your family is living in a location and there's no other family that access to this place, you don't need to make an eruv within your own family. But if they're different, to be different families, different units, then that would be an issue. So yeah, that's why if you happen to be somewhere in the middle of nowhere for Shabbos, right? You wouldn't need, and you're considering doing making it or not. So if you happen to rent out, a whole, like a cottage with with a yard and everything, and you're there, you don't need to make an eruv in order for all of you to be able to carry within the house and stay within the fence around it. But you might need an eruv. But then let's say if there's a few neighbors, then let's say it wasn't just a standalone house, but it was let's say there's multiple houses opening up in the same complex. Think more like a bungalow colony type thing, where there's multiple houses opening to the same area. Then you would need an eruv in order to be able to carry, even if there is the same fence.
So a visitor, someone staying over, even if it's fenced, once you go outside the walls of the house, you have an issue unless you have make the challahs and make an eruv. Someone who's visiting.
If you have a guest, let's say you have a cottage, right? Your cottage, in order to be able to carry with no need for any fixings, you need to have upper walls surrounding your area. Right.
Okay, so
carry with no eruv. Let's say like the cottage case, right?
Okay.
If let's say your family rented a cottage and the cottage has a nice fenced-in yard around it, right? That's your courtyard for these purposes. You can carry in the house and in the courtyard, right? So assuming there aren't any gaps bigger than 10 amot around that backyard, then you're good. If you have a guest, so the guest is considered to be part of you, is considered to be part of your yard, or a part of your family unit for that week. So just to get your guests. So they don't need a separate area. They don't need a separate area for anything.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah, but if you were to have, again, but if there's another family opening into the same yard,
Oh,
then you would
yeah.
need an Eruv. And the question is do you consider to be that there's there's two houses. There's the Rebbe's house and his family, and then there's where the students are staying. There's two houses opening into this courtyard. So do we consider them to be that they're one family and two houses, or do we like that's just spread out over two houses, or are they two separate families?
Oh, so the students are staying in a separate house opening to the same chutzner? Is that where?
Yes.
Oh, they're not staying in the same house. Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
otherwise, if they were staying in the same house, then it would be much easier to say.
No Shiloh. Okay.
Unit.
Okay.
If they're not considered to be staying in the same unit, right? If they're considered to be, like your guests, they're living in your house, that'd be one thing. But if they're not living in your house, here that'll be different.
Okay.
So I'm related to Itua. So we learned this in the following Beit that Avu Bno Harav Talmido Bizman She'ein Mehen Diurin Rehein Kichidim Ein Tzrichim La'arev Mavoy Shalhem Nitar Balechi B'Korah. So I mean that again in both these cases. So all you would need, the father and son, again living in. You got two houses. Again, you could have the two houses. Case could also be if you have, let's say, two apartments, where even they're in the same physical overall building, it counts the same as if they are separate houses. Or you got the father and son, Rebbe and Talmud, master and student. If there's nobody else having access to this area besides them, then you consider it to be one unit, and you don't need to make an extra. No need for another Eruv. And the mavoy can be all you need to do is add a lechi or a korah in order to tell people that this mavoy is now closed off for these and is meant to be carried in for the people of this mavoy, and you don't need to do anything else to fix it because there's only people that you're dealing with are this one unit, not multiple units. So it makes the law much simpler. Okay. Okay, now let's get to, here we go. Okay, so now we're starting a new Mishnah. Let me try and get the picture up. One moment, please. There we go. Okay, so here we go. Everybody sees the Mishnah up here, the picture up here. So that's our case. So so we have 5 courtyards that open onto each other, and they're also open to the alleyway. Each of them made an Eruv through the courtyards, but they did not make a sheet of mavo'ot to connect the mavoy. Then you're allowed to carry in the courtyards, but you're not allowed to carry in the mavoy, right? So even if but if you made a sheet of mavo'ot, but you forgot to make an Eruv, that would be fine. If you both made an Eruv chatzerot and you did a sheet of mavo'ot, so now we're doubly linked. If everybody went in to be for the Eruv and went in for the mavoy, but then one person forgot to be part of the Eruv, then it would still be permitted in both places because there still is a sheet of mavoy in place. But what if the residents of the mavoy forgot and didn't do shituv? Mutarin b'chatzerot v'asher b'mavoy shamavoy l'chatzerot k'chatzer l'batim. And we'd say that if somebody was one of the people in the mavoy was not part of the joint venture shituv mavot, then you're still allowed to carry in the chatzer, but you're not allowed to carry in the mavoy because the way that a mavoy is. The relationship between a mavoy and the courtyards is the same as between a courtyard and a house, which makes it very, very nice and clean. And or again, so let's do a sheet to move and an Eruv is a question of seemingly only of granularity, right? That, as we go down smaller and smaller, right? So sheet of mavot is to connect mavois, which are again your elements, which are larger than courtyards. So that's all it is. Because just like there's multiple houses opening up into a courtyard, there's multiple courtyards opening up into an alleyway, and that's how it goes. The laws are the same, just one can cover the other one because they work identically. So now we're trying to figure. So now the Gemara is going to try to figure out who is our Mishnah like. So Mani. So who is it like? Rimeirhi Amar B'inan Eruv V'inan Shitov. So this must be according to Rimeir, who requires both Eruv and Shitov in order to use an area. So Ema Mitziata. The English stuff of Mavoi Mutar Kan Vakan. Wait, but doesn't it say in the middle clause of the Mishnah that if they made a sheet of Mavot, even if somebody made a mistake and didn't join the Eruv, as they wrote, you're still allowed to carry in both places, both the Mavot and the courtyards. So that sounds like we're just back to Chaim's opinion that you need either an Eruv or a Shituf, but not both. Hello, Kasha. No, because that's not really a problem, because the Mishnah stated that if they had done Shituf Mavot, they're allowed to carry in both. So it doesn't really say that you shouldn't do one, it's just stating that in this case it can cover you. So ideally you should be doing both. So Ema Seifa. So then let's how about the last part of the Mishnah, which says so do you need to make an Eruv and a Shituf or not? So the last part of the Mishnah states that if you made an Eruv and a Shituf, an Eruv Chatzerot and in the courtyards, and you made a Shituf Mavot with the Mavoy, and then one of the people in the courtyard forgot, didn't make an Eruv, which are Lakan or Lakan, you're allowed to carry in both places. Hechidami. What do you mean by you're allowed to carry? If you want to say that he did it Bittul Rishus, then why are they allowed to carry it all? Rather, of course, he gave up his rights. So then explain the last. So explain the last half. Explain the last half of it then. So what about the last half, which says, so we're saying that if you're talking about a case where you basically give up your rights afterwards, then why are we saying that if one of the people of the Mavoy made a mistake and didn't do part of the Shituf, why can't he simply do Bittul by the Shituf Mavot? Right? Because if you're saying that they're all the same, and the only difference is that the only thing that's different then the Bittul should remove you from both cases. Then why can't you use the Mavoy if somebody forgot to have them do Bittul and everybody else can carry? So and so then, and if you want to try to tell me that Remeir says that you can't do Bittul Rishut Mavoy, but you can buy a what's there? Hatanya, Hare Bitel Chaim Rishuto, do very Remeir. Look at another Beit. Remeir says by a case of the people around a Mavoy that he gave up his rights to the Mavoy. So, right. So what's going on here? Why is the Mavoy? Why are we not doing the option of doing Bittul the Mishnah for the Mavoy, where it's seemingly an option for the Chatzer? Rather, much of the case is where somebody forgot to participate in the Shituf Mavot and didn't do Bittul. So Midasei for Lo Batil, Reishanamid Lo Batil. Since in the last part he did not do Bittul, therefore in the first part of the Mishnah he also didn't do Bittul. Reisha V'Sefer B'Meir Mitziyata Rabbanim. Then we got a problem because it seems like the first and last parts of the Mishnah follow Remeir. But the middle one seems like they're Rabbanan. We're allowing you to do either Shituf or Eruv, but not need to do both. So what is it? So Kula Remeir. He no, really the whole mention of Remeir. He the Tamamai Amar Remeir Beinan Eruvin and Beinan Shituf. So right, so really does all Remeir, but we have to go back and explain the reasoning behind why Remeir wants you to have both an Eruv Chatzerot as well as a Shituf Mavot. Lo Shakaf Torah Eruv Minatinokot. The Haka Kiv the Ruba Irvu Lo Dakha. No, when he says you need to make both, it's not because he feels that one of those won't cover the whole area. It will, right? Just the shituf is enough, and and Eruvin, and if you do Eruvin properly, it's also enough. The only question is will the children in the courtyard here forget that Eruvin exists? And there's nobody going to forget that Eruvin exists if everybody made an Eruv except for this one guy who forgot. His kids will remember that will still remember that he's supposed to make an Eruv. They'll just think that their parent made a mistake one week. So, right, and that's how we can solve. That's how we solve it. So we're still good. So Amar of Yehuda, Rav Lotani Tuchazulazu. Yehuda says that Rav does not have in his did not teach us that had to be open. The courts had to be open to each other. Again, Rav Kahana, Rav Lotani Tuchazulazu. Again, so Rav Kahana also says that Rav said they don't need to be open to each other, right? So remember our case here. So he's saying that the little entrance between the various courtyards is unnecessary. It doesn't change any of the dinim whatsoever. So you get to Amri, Rav Kahana Gufay Lo Tani Tuchazulazu, or maybe Rav Kahana also taught the teaching, not it says the name of Rav. Amrle Abaye Rav Yosef. Then Abaye said Rav Yosef as follows: My time ad Lo Tani Tuchazulazu. So Abaye asked Rav Yosef, wait, so why do you not have to? Why are they required to be open to each other? Savar Kol Shituf She'ein Machliso Umosio Derech Dachim B'Mavoy Lashmei Shituf. Must hold that you can't, if you did a shituf mavot and you did via various courtyards and the mavoy, and people don't carry through them, and if each there doesn't have a way to get to the mavoy, it wouldn't be shituf because you didn't actually have access to the alleyway in order for you to be merging with the alleyway. So that would create an issue, right? And if they can, so therefore, if they had openings between the openings exist, who's to say that the people in the courtyards are going to actually give food to each other? They're just going to pass it from one courtyard to another courtyard, and that'll be it. So Itvei Bal Habayit Shayashu Taf L'Shchenav Lazeh B'Yayin Lazeh B'Yayin Ein Zichim La'arev. We stated we mentioned in an earlier Mishnah that if you had a partnership with your neighbors, with each of them, you had a partnership, a shituf via wine. Don't need to make an eruv. Hatam up gave islet. So that case is where they why don't you need to make an eruv? It's because they put the wine out in the mavoy, and then they had put it back in. That's why you can replace the eruv, because you'd actually brought it into the mavoy. But if not, then it wouldn't replace the Eruv Chatzerot. Okay? So now, Kate said we stop doing Mavoy. So now, sorry, Itvei. So again, Kate said we stop doing Mavoy. So we back in our so another Mishnah talks about how you're supposed to do Shituf Mavoy. So, and it says that you need to make sure that you need to have enough food. It doesn't mention at any point the fact that you're supposed to have to pass about access to the mavoy. No. So again, since it's mentioned no mention of moving the food, you need to move the food. So no, the Gemara is saying it doesn't say it, but really they clearly took the food out to the courtyard, from the courtyards into the mavoy, and then they brought it back afterwards. And that's why we'd say that it would work similarly. That it was really based on, in order for a shituf to work instead of an eruv, it needs to have been brought out so we can clearly have use of it. Makif le Rabba Bar Chanan. So then Rabba Chanan asked the following question: Elamiata. Hikner lo pat besalo hachinami lo havishita. So then couldn't you say, Rabba Bar Chanan asked, and couldn't you simply be, transfer ownership of the bread in your basket, somebody else, and then wouldn't that be considered shituf? When somebody says that that's a kosher shituf, it's not. That's not how shituf works. So what is it? Chitem hachanam. You're going to say that the case of if somebody gives somebody rights to your bread, that's considered to be a shituf v'hod. V'ha'amar Rav Yehuda amarav b'nei chabura hayu musabin the ben b'kiyesh alein hayom hapach al shulchan samchan aleh mishum eruv amri la mishum shituf. So we're trying to like, do you need to actively do anything in terms of bringing out the bread or the wine to show that it's going to be a proper shituf now? So, but we're like, since when do you have to do that? There's a case where people are eating, having their nice meal together, and then all of a sudden it's Shabbos, and so then what happens is that again, so they're having a long lunch on Friday, then all of a sudden notice, oops, it's Shabbos now. So we say that since there's bread still on the table, you don't need to make a separate eruv. You can simply use or sheet. You can simply use that bread and you're good. So what's the case? So v'amaraba lo pligi kan musum BAYT kan musum b'chaser. Now there's a difference is whether or not whether the bread will be for an eruv or for a shituf is based on where the meal is being housed. If the meal is being housed in somebody's house, then it can only work by means of an eruv. But if it was housed in the courtyard, it can only work by means of shituf v'hod. Why is that? Because when you make an eruv, you have to place the eruv in a house. But when you make a shituf v'hod, it has the food of the shituf has to be placed in a courtyard, right? So each time it's supposed to be one level down in terms of the level of usage, right? So people who courtyard is a shared space made up of many different houses sharing the courtyard, right? And then an alleyway, mavoy, is made up of many different courtyards sharing access to the alleyway. So that's how that would work. So they're not arguing about which one you need. They're simply arguing about technically which one is it technically placed at. So Ella Ta'ama Derav, the Kasavar, Ein Mavoy Nitar Belachi Bekora, Ad Shivatim Chaterov, Rather, what is the reasoning behind Rav, who says that you don't need to have open into each other, but they just need to open into the Mavoy? So he holds that the Kasavar, Ein Mavoy Nitar Belachi Bekora, you mean you can't allow the Mavoy to be carried in with a lechi or a Korah. You can only use the lech to be matir mavoy. The only way that a mavoy is that you will use the case of a lech and a korah to close off a mavoy. If there's houses and courtyards opening into the mavoy, but if not, then we require you to do a but if the courtyards don't open into each other, then it's as if there's only one courtyard. There's only one individual having access to the alleyway, and then the mavoy wouldn't be able to be allowed via just lechi or korah. You need to do a more formal wall. Okay. So now let's do a quick sum up of what we covered today. So we continue talking about what's the determinant for where you're living. Is it based on where you sleep or where you eat? And we came to we didn't fully reach a whole conclusion in this Gemara. As I mentioned, the machloket at the end of the day is a little bit left machloket, but the Gemara seemingly leans towards it most definitely goes by where you're sleeping, because in most cases it tends to push in that direction. But again, the Gemara is inconclusive, which is why halach l'maaseh it still remains a machloket. That goes by where you sleep versus where you eat, which one you would prefer. And then we mentioned the case of the multiple courtyards into the mavoi. We mentioned that if you did concurrently Erev Hatzerot and Shittim Mavot, we say that we follow the again, they work identically, just a question of granularity. And then we went on to discuss why you need both. If stimuli both work the same way, and we can say that that children don't get confused and forget that Erev exists. And that is in order for a Shittim Mavot to actually go into effect, we say that you need to have multiple courtyards opening in, making a Erev where there's only one person using an air, making a Shittim Mavot when there's only one courtyard wouldn't work.
So, Rabbi, just a quick question. I'm trying to get it from a practical point of view how a shituf with wine would work. Like, does one of them go out and buy a big barrel and they all give them $20 or something, or do they all bring? How does it practically make a shituf? Yeah.
So is it right? So a lot of times it would be like when you go to make wine, it's like a joint venture. It's not just like let's say it could be that they all together, like it's a lot of effort making wines. They all together decided we're going to be either they already were partners in it, or they decided like it takes a lot of money to invest in wine, so let's all contribute a little bit, and then we'll go in and buy a really nice big barrel. Like each of us are alone, we can't afford to do that, so that's why we'll all be partners in this business venture.
Okay.
Question about the last example that we had with the Chatzerot and the Mavoi. If the house opens directly into the Mavoi and the Chatzer is behind it, does that qualify?
As if it qualified as a Chatzer or as a Mavoi, that would make it would still remain being a Mavoi. It would still be a Mavoi, but then if you had, let's say you had a courtyard in somebody's house and opening up onto the Mavoi, that would be counted as being multiple people having access to the Mavoi. And then you could have a Mavoi even if there's only one courtyard having access to it. But the general way to look at it is that it's basically used to design Roman cities. I could bring you a diagram if you want. They basically used to have that. They used to do like.
No, I understand how they're normally set up, but I'm just wondering about this particular situation that they mentioned.
Right. So if you have a house and a courtyard opening up, you need to have multiple units opening into the alleyway for it to be a valid option.
Yeah. Okay.
So multiple separate units.
Right.
One of them would just be a courtyard, I believe. So.
One of them. Okay.
Right. Not necessarily both. At least one.
All right, Shkoya.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Good day, everybody. Take care.